So, welcome to Black Tot Rum Club. My name is Mitch Wilson, Global Brand Ambassador for Black Tot Rum. Tonight, we are going to explore an area of the world where I spent the last several years over in Australia, and we're going to look at their rum, and in particular the rum of one very famous distillery in Australia, the Beenleigh rum distillery. We're very honored to have Steve Magarry joining us tonight, who is looking after all things Beenleigh, and it's very hard to go through anything now on a rum forum and not see Steve either putting up some nice history points for everyone to read up on, or a little hashtag need more Beenleigh. So Steve, welcome tonight. So good to see you. How are you?
Great, thanks, Mitch. It's a pleasure and an honour to be on this call. And yes, we all need more Beenleigh.
There, we've got it out the way now. We can everyone add that hashtag on. So welcome. Or we just to sort of give a little introduction in tonight's sessions. This is part of currently our Black Tot month leading up to the 51st anniversary of Black Tot Day on the 31st of July. We've been going around the UK doing our Your Bar Needs You tour and celebrating some of our favorite bars around the country. We would love to do more bars around the world, but we're not allowed to travel without extensive quarantine, which would make a tour hard right now. So we've been going around the UK, but it's so good to be able to do this online session with you all. Thank you for not all being completely sick of Zoom calls. So we can actually reach more people around the world. By the way, anyone who's on the Zoom call with us, if you do fancy turning on your video, if you're not in your pajamas, or even if you are welcome to, just so you can get a feel of who's enjoying it and who's fallen asleep. Oh, there we go. Patsy's our Patsy guest is, I believe, a gerbil or some kind of hamster, which is a wonderful addition to a rum tasting. So, Steve, let's get started. I want to begin because over the last year or two, we have seen an explosion of Australia rum, certainly hitting our shores in the UK, certainly popping up around Europe, to a degree that, to be honest, we've never seen before. And I think for years, there was a perception of like Aussie rum, or even bartenders who'd come over from Australia, Aussie rum's over there, but we don't see it much over here. Occasionally you might get a bottle with, potentially a polar bear brought over or something like that. But otherwise, we didn't see a whole lot of Australian rum over on this side of the world. And it feels like you've really changed this, and you've really worked hard, not to just put Beenleigh on the map, but Australian rum as a whole. So to begin with, I'd love to share with everyone here, what was your story? First of all, how did you come to Beenleigh? What was your background? Were you, I imagine, as far as I know, Australian kids are just weaned on rum when, so I guess you just started with that and here you are now. But I'd love to know your backstory and how you came to be where you are today.
No, thanks for the intro, Mitch. And so just to get everybody up to speed with my background, where I grew up in Queensland, we're in the middle of the sugarcane belt here for Australia, and where I grew up is in around an area where actually, if you look at the Australian rum history, it goes back 150 plus years into the 1860s. And I didn't know this until only a few years ago, but where the area that I grew up, and it's quite close to Bundaberg, hour away from Bundaberg rum. That is the brand that we all grew up on. Because you look 20 years ago, 10 years ago, that's all Australia knew as rum. That was pretty much the one and only brand that we were exposed to. We didn't know any different. And so in the area that I grew up was actually three, but two major sugar mills that actually had their own rum distilleries. And they're two of the oldest in Australia that date back into that original mid-1860s period. And also along the journey that I've ended up in distilling, particularly the rum industry, along the way I've also found out some of my ancestry originally coming out from immigrating from the UK. And the reason why they came out here late 1860s, early 1870s was actually to bring sugarcane milling equipment out from Glasgow and Edinburgh out to Australia to the plantations here. So, well, one could say, you know, sugar rum's almost in the blood, which is a bit serendipitous, but it's interesting to look. And that's a thing that most people don't realise, that there is that, you know, more, you know, 1.5 centuries of specifically rum history in Australia. Not many people here actually know that either. And it's when you look past the bigger brands here that we have Bundaberg, we've got obviously Beenleigh, we also had CSR in Sydney, and delving behind, yeah, I guess getting behind those three stalwart brands, and really getting into the rich fabric of the industry here. So back to, I guess, some more of my personal backgrounds. I have a biology, chemistry background. How I got into distilling, I was actually studying a research PhD in renewable fuels, looking at ethanol production, also looking at biofuel, biodiesel production, which got me into fermentation, distilling. And from that was, okay, you know, looking at then into the craft distilling industry. And at the time I was living over in the US, in Florida, and, you know, really starting to get exposed to the Caribbean rum industry, and looking at, yeah, as an Australian living in the US, that we didn't have access to all these Caribbean rums and various brands and quality, because at that time I only really knew one brand. And so that really opened my eyes up to what rum is, what it can be, but also what rum is not as well. And then, so long story short, here I am today at Beenleigh. I'm the distillery manager here. I'm actually the group distiller for the parent company, Bickford's Group. So not only do I look after, my primary focus is the Beenleigh Distillery, but also am the head of our sister distillery in South Australia. It's about 2,000 kilometres away from here, basically on the other side of the country. And the 23rd Street Distillery focuses on gin, vodka, brandy and single malt whiskey. So in our group portfolio, we have a lot going on. However, first and foremost, rum is my priority. So.
As it should be. So, and you make some interesting points there about when your time in US and sort of discovering, if you like, the Caribbean rums they had access to, which you maybe didn't have in Australia. And I think this is an interesting point for anyone who maybe hasn't been to Australia or hasn't spent much time there. Is like, it is so far away from a lot of the world, and now the rum selections are getting much better. Like there's a few bars over there like the Lobo and the Walrus Club and some places dotted around that are really, you know, championing rum over there and bringing all sorts of rum from around the world into Australia. But that wasn't always the case, and definitely the selection was often, you know, a little bit more limited back in the day, and has improved over the years. There is also another area which we'll touch on a little later on, but in Australia, it's one of the few countries that has the 2-year minimum age requirement for rum. So if you want a bottle of Wray & Nephew over in Australia, historically that has not been possible or legal, because you can't call it rum and you can't import it into Australia. So it's not just a rule that affects their rum, but all the rums coming in as well. So, you know, a lot of these unaged spirits that we love in the rum world, we don't see as much in Australia, and they're having to find different ways to get around that. But these are all different things that we're going to cover tonight. We're going to really delve deep into the Australian rum side, but where I want to start is the origin of the spirit in Australia, because obviously when the first colonies were set up in Australia, and when that era of Australian history began, obviously rum would have been not there straight away. We would have probably brought rum over from other parts of the world first. But very quickly, rum became synonymous with Australia, and you know, as I say, it is your national spirit. So I'd love to discuss with you and get a bit of the history on how rum first became an Australian stronghold.
Yeah, so, you know, Australia, you know, being an English colony, we go back in the late 1700s, and the original settlement in the Sydney area, but also down in Tasmania. So the rum coming into the colony at the time, because of geographically where we are, the English were coming through to India and across from India down down the east coast of Australia. So part of that shipping route was that we were getting rum out of India, brought into Australia. So that was a major source at the time before rum production actually started in Australia. But then when you look at the archives and you look through the history, it was actually a real melting pot of rum sources. It was coming out of, you know, Rio in South America. It was coming out of, you know, Massachusetts, Boston, eastern US as well. It was also coming out of the Caribbean, which was the furthest and the best quality. And then you see, when you go through the archives and what rum was available here, you really see a pricing structure based on quality, based on distance, and obviously that was reflective of the expense to get it here, and how highly prized it was, to the point where at one stage the Australian colony didn't have a currency, didn't have money. So rum was actually bartered back and forth because it held its value, and it really was a commodity, and the early colonists were holding on to that rum, such a prize, and that the rum holding its value, that for example, one of the original major importers and wholesalers or traders of the rum almost went bankrupt because no one could afford to pay their bills in the currency, because they were trying to trade rum instead.
So, hello, lost you there for a sec. No, go on.
Yes, so yeah, it's just in the early days, really melting pot of rum sourced from all basically wherever they can get it from, wherever it was coming, you know, on a ship past the Australian coast, and everybody was thirsty. It was a hard you know, colony and upbringing for young Australia. But when you look at the stats of how much, not just rum, but just alcohol in general, has been consumed out here as well, it was you know, one way to try and pass the time. But we don't, in Australian history, we don't really see a lot of distilling happening within early Australia through to about 1820s. There was a lot of moonshining and sort of that the start of illegal distilling, and early on it was largely considered illegal because the government was controlling it, was controlling the consumption, but it was also the taxation side of the colonial government trying to regulate that consumption and the tax flow. The first main distill, there was 1823, 1825 is the era where we start seeing the first commercial distilleries being incorporated in Sydney, but also down in Tasmania and Hobart as well. But the rum industry here didn't really pick up until the 1860s, and that's just off the back of the sugarcane industry. As we know, wherever sugarcane, you typically will see the rum industry follow suit.
Mm. And there are some wild stories about the origins of rum in Australia, which I love. Like in Sydney, where I was living for a few years, I always remember seeing this plaque outside the Sydney, now called the Sydney Hospital, of saying that this hospital used to be called the Rum Hospital, and was actually paid for with rum, because when they first started the colony there, you know, rum was legitimately a currency that was used, and a way of paying off obviously the corpse there and everything going on. So I'd love for people who haven't heard that story, I'd love you to share a little bit about that, and you know, how vital rum was, not just as a drink, but as an actual way of paying for services and for buildings to be built and hospitals back in the day.
Yeah, so with that example, the Sydney Rum Hospital, which ended up being turned into the Australian Mint, basically there was a building contract, and the way that the building was paid for was not bartering, but basically a monopoly on the rum supply in the Sydney colony. And so with that, it was for, I think it was for 3 years and a period. And basically the team that were tasked or had the contract to build the building, the hospital, effectively they had the monopoly on that rum trade in Sydney. And basically it really was a monopoly at the time. And interesting, you know, politics with between the government and the supply of the rum coming in, but also it was also about controlling what was being imported into the colony, but also what was being sold throughout the colony. So the guys involved basically made more money out of selling rum than they did out of building a building. So it was just going lightly into those details, but that's the crux of it.
So if anyone watching needs any kind of construction work doing, just if you offer Australians enough rum, they will build it for you. So and one of the other wild stories which I loved, so I did a rum tasting when I was over in Queensland at a place called the Walrus Club. And I was like, why is it called the Walrus Club? And discovered the story of the SS Walrus, which was this kind of this renegade sugarcane distilling ship, which just floated from port to port, collecting sugarcane, distilling it into rum, and avoiding tax laws because technically it wasn't on land. And this obviously has a big sort of tie-in to some of the Beenleigh origin stories, if I'm correct. So can we talk a little bit about the old SS Walrus and what that used to do?
Yes. So as legend has it, between 1869, 1872, there's really a focus of a 3 to 4 year period. There was this 120 foot vessel. So we're based, Beenleigh Distillery is based on the edge of the Albert River. A lot of the sugarcane plantations in the area, we are up and down the coast here, are all on the edges of fairly significant rivers. Back in those times, it was a major mode of transport. And so the easiest way to get between those plantations or those sugar mills was by boat. So ingenious idea was to have this boat. It was converted to have a sugar mill on board the boat. And part of that conversion is that they put a 500 gallon or 2,000 litre pot still on board. So as they would pull up, driving up and down, up and down the rivers, pulling up to the sugar plantations, contracts processing their sugar cane, crushing the juice, processing the molasses. Well, instead of the molasses going overboard and back into the river or back under the farm, they kept a portion of the molasses, fermented it, and distilled it on board, making rum on this boat. And so it's well recorded that it occurred. The Albert River here. There we go. That is the Walrus. If everybody, it's pretty plain, and in the front and centre there, 2,000 litre pot still. It's actually a vat still, so timber vat. You can see the hoops there of the vat. It's copper pot on it. And so that as I said, going up and down the local rivers here, not just for Beenleigh, but also we're on the Albert River. You've got the Logan, you've got Coomera and Nerang, out into the Moreton Bay, which then goes into Brisbane. And so this was travelling around the area. Wooden pot still? Yes, it was. Sorry, hi Keegan. So yeah, this boat was traveling around from various farms, various plantations, and then after a period of several years, yes, they were basically showing to the authorities that they weren't necessarily declaring all the excise tax from the rum that they were producing. So yeah, essentially, yeah. And so that's an infamous bit of history for the Beenleigh distillery. You know, it makes a lot of sense for you know, looking at that. Again, it's trying to keep authorities happy with tax laws and regulations. But I know a lot of times that we bring this history up and talk about a distillery and a boat, it raises a lot of eyebrows. But then people go, "Yeah, that's a great idea." Yeah, if you look again historically, looking at a lot of the sugarcane plantation growing areas, take it, yeah, Martinique or Demerara regions, they're all on rivers, and so it's a great idea. Someone should do it again.
So, Ollie, we need a boat.
Like you asked that last year, Mitch.
But it is fantastic. So and am I right in thinking, so this still was when they finally decommissioned the boat and when the run of the SS Walrus finally came to an end, that still became the first still of Beenleigh. Is that correct?
That's our understanding, and it's not 100% confirmed. And the reason why, and I can go into this further, but over 137 years of history here on site since 1884, we've actually had, I think it's now a count of 18 flood events through the distillery. We have lost a lot of that history and archives over the time. So that particular period through to the mid 1880s, the early 1890s is a bit grey for us. The oldest building that we do have on site here does definitely date 1890s, after one of the major floods that we've had through the distillery. And we've got some of our old vats here that date to the 1890s as well. And for anybody that has seen the old pot stills that we have had, it was what Beenleigh was known for a very long time as double pot still rum. We do have which I can go into more details later on, but we do have a pair, wash and spirits still pair that is originally was wooden vat stills, single retort, rectifier, shell and tube condenser, with a shell and tube condenser, and then goes to a worm tub coil. Certainly a beast of a setup, but that was what Beenleigh was traditionally made on from the 1890s through to the 1970s. And lucky enough to taste some of the liquid off that still and that process. It's just fantastic. Just while I've got it here, that's an old 1950s bottling right there. So
I think there's a lot of people in this room who'd like to be drinking that with you right now. No, I'm magic. So this brings us nicely on to let's talk about the nuts and bolts of Beenleigh rum today and how it's made, because obviously we're seeing, as we said at the start, Beenleigh is popping up now in so many different independent bottlings, and now with some of your own brands rum coming over as well. So talk us through how it's made. How many, what's the method? What's your fermentation time? What are you fermenting in? Is it closed? Is it open? What are you distilling in? What are you aging in? Like, give us all the nuts and bolts, because we've got enough geeks here who would really appreciate to know the ins and outs of what you're doing there.
Cool. Yeah, before I get started, if anybody hasn't caught the Rumcast I did last year with the Rumcast guys, Will and John in the US, it's a great way to I guess listen back into this same content. But I'll dive straight into it. So Beenleigh always has been and will be 100% molasses-based distillery. our molasses historically has come from the local sugarcane industry here. That's how we started. For example, there was a sugar mill here, or a plantation, and then sugar mill here on site up until 1915, and that was the molasses supply at the time. And from 1915 onwards, sourcing the molasses from the local sugarcane industry. So 20 minutes away from us, there's what we call a Rocky Point sugar mill. It's in the northern area of the Gold Coast. So there is local sugar around us. And then outside from that, we do source our molasses from 3 locations. We have northern New South Wales. So anyone that's familiar with the Byron Bay, Northern Rivers district, we can bring our molasses up from there. We also bring it down from more central or north Queensland, which is the real sugar belt, I guess, of Australia, which is the Bundaberg and Mackay region. And so we definitely do see a variation in the quality of the molasses, and I guess there's that aspect of terroir coming through in where the molasses is coming from, the region it's coming out of, the quality of it, what's happening seasonally as well. Even though it's C grade, black strap type molasses, we definitely see a difference in the quality. And any of us in the rum industry using molasses, we see it, we know it, we recognise it, and particularly when it's coming off the pot, we will know, and we can tell, but just on that spirit quality, we can tell where the molasses is coming from without even, blind sample, without even knowing the actual source. So it's not that it's a huge variation in quality, but we would definitely have the awareness of that variation. We do have our preference as well of where that molasses comes from. And so once we bring it into the distillery, in our storage tank,
where do you prefer it to come from?
I won't reveal my sources.
So this is such an interesting aspect of rum for me, right? Because the raw material and the sourcing and where we're going from, obviously, most of the time it's going through huge brokers. Australia is unique in that obviously you make a huge amount of molasses in that country, and to a certain extent, I know some of that is controlled, but also it's, there's a huge amount there to play with if you have the access to it. And it's very rare where we hear about distilleries like Worthy Park who are making all their own molasses, or Maggie, who's in the Zoom room with us tonight. And, I remember hearing, how she found this source of molasses and local source and knew exactly where it was coming from. And this is something that we kind of often don't talk about in the rum world. And I find it curious how it's, there's still a bit of mystery around this aspect of rum. And I think a lot of people would like to know more, but I'm curious to know why it's one of those things where it's like, why you might guard it, or why you might say, well, no, we don't talk about this part because maybe you don't want anyone else to get that particular flavor or strain or whatever it is, and I think it's an interesting aspect to touch on.
Yeah, it's fascinating. I could talk all day about sugarcane and sugarcane varieties and molasses and just that sugar process. And that's the thing, the scope, the size of the sugar industry here and the availability of the molasses. Like essentially, it is a byproduct of the process of that sugar process. We don't have a lot of control over the availability, or I guess where that sugar cane varietal type, in the ground varieties, like you look at other distilleries globally that are very, particularly in agricole as well, very much focused on the provenance and varietals of specific cane that is being used. Now, from the commercial sense here in Australia, there is about 6 different varieties that are focused on from the commercial aspect that are the far majority of the commercial crop grown that is for sugar. So it's not that we can...
6 varieties of the cane itself.
Yes,
or of the
and that's the majority of the sugarcane crop It's not that we can, not from our end at the distillery or from the molasses, we could specify it. It's one of six. It's always coming in from, by the time the sugar cane is grown, it's harvested, it goes into a mill. By the time it's converted into molasses, it's a complete blend, mixture, combination of whatever goes into the sugar mill. And so they certainly don't separate it by variety or the quality of the molasses based on where it's coming from. There's certainly no demand for that traceability or segregation of cane varieties. So we get what we get from the sugar mills, and then when what we dictate for quality that comes in. So once we bring the molasses in, then we have 6 30,000 litre fermenters. And so with our fermentation process, it's not it has definitely changed over the years. And so since 2010, it's been 100% Cerevisiae yeast fermentation. So typically 2 to 3 days, depending on the time of year. Like we're in the middle of winter here, and we've just because of a lot of the age of the distillery and the process that we've historically maintained, we really run on ambient temperature. We don't facilitate a lot of cooling or controlled fermentation. So cooler months, it slows everything down, or it can take up to 4 or 5 days for the ferment. And so we do recognise that cooler ferments, longer fermentation does facilitate a better quality rum versus if we were to do our fermentation during summer here, and we are in a tropical climate, that our fermentation might be done in 24 to 30 hours. And those fermentations will get up to 42, 44 degrees and basically they'll cook themselves. And so that creates a very different flavour profile.
So just to pause on that, just to pause on that for a second, because that's very interesting. Like typically we talk about, distilleries and this is their fermentation time and this is what they do. So it's really interesting here at different parts of the year, you're changing the length of fermentation to adjust for it. And does that affect then what you would use that fermentation for, that wash for? Would you, during the summer months, would you make a different type of mark or different flavor of rum based on, against the winter months, say when you're doing that longer fermentation with it? What does that do to the end product and how do you balance that out?
Yes, so with our process here, aside from the focus on the rum production, we also do neutral cane spirit production. So we do have a neutral column that we do get up to 96%. And so during the summer month, we really do back off the rum focus and switch across to and increase the focus on our neutral spirit production. And that's mainly from a productivity perspective, that we know that we're not necessarily focused on our fermentation cycle. We're just really after that alcohol production and productivity through the process to getting that spirit up to 96%. And then we'll put on the stainless steel. And the reason why we do this and why that neutral spirit production focus is because that cane spirit is the base spirit for our sister distillery, and for the gin production and the vodka production, that then becomes a base spirit for those to facilitate the gin and the vodka. And then we have
everyone just breathed a sigh of relief that it wasn't for the rum. They're like, it's fine. It's vodka and gin. It's fine.
Yeah, and
they can have it. That's all right.
So it's across the diverse portfolio that we have, we do have that demand to service. And so during the hotter summer months, that's our focus. Not to say we don't do the rum ferments, but really the preference when we very much focused on our rum, it's during that cooler winter or autumn type months. Now, as I said, Cerevisiae since 2010. Previous to that, Beenleigh was doing something quite different, for at least for the Australian rum profile between the mid 2000s through to 2010. So 5 years, 2005, 2010. The production here was primarily focused on Pombe production as well. So very different fermentation process. So using up to 30 to 40% dunder, recycling that back through. We had a full-scale propagation system here specifically for Pombe yeast production, and the propagation of that yeast back into the dunder fermentation. And that fermentation time was up to 12 to 14 days. And so that was a very different focus at the time. And the reason why that was utilised is because when historically we look back through Australian rum history and we look across to the Inner Circle rum history from the CSR Distillery in Sydney, which then goes back in early 1900s. That's where that flavour profile, that's where that fermentation process in Australian rum history came from.
Yeah.
And so, and just focus on the Pombe yeast for a second. What the largest molasses-based ethanol distiller in Australia, produces 60 million litres a year. It's predominantly for the ethanol fuel market, and it's a huge column still. It is 100% Pombe yeast that they utilise for that production, very specifically for environmental productivity, utilising the Pombe yeast. But as we all rum geeks think that it's all about high ester counts and long funky ferments, well, not necessarily.
It's not. I'm sure there's some people here in the room who are like 12 to 14 day ferments and Pombe.
Yeah.
Yes, absolutely. Like, bring it back.
Wow.
So what was the change? What was the change? Why did you move away from that? And are you considering bringing any of those elements back in? And also, how does that change the rum? Okay, because I feel like we all geek out about it and we all talk about different types of yeast and we're like, oh yeah, Pombe is amazing, Cerevisiae, okay, that's, standard. Like, what does it actually do to the end product and how is it different and why did you make the choices you made? And are you going to change any of those things going forward as well?
Yes, so as I said, that era of mid 2000 or through 2010 was during previous owners of the distillery, and the focus at the time really was a carbon copy of the Inner Circle rum production process using the Pombe. However, that flavour profile at the time, the Australian consumers just weren't open to the heavier, funkier, bolder flavour. And so the rum at the Inner Circle rum that was on the market at the time was actually dialed back flavour profile, roughly 30% was Pombe, 70% Cerevisiae blend. And so when you see our vintages of 2005, 6, 7 through 2009, they do have a 30 to 40% Pombe element. And so the 2007 particularly, that is through the independent bottlers that we supply via EHE of Carsten in Amsterdam and Main Rumco in Liverpool. That's where we have, basically we're seeing a different mark. We're seeing to what we have been producing since 2010. And so we do see that higher ester count coming through. And the main reason why we changed away from that was change of ownership in the business, and with that change of focus, increase our productivity, changing from a 12 to 14 day ferment down to 2 to 3 day ferment makes a significant difference in our productivity and the volume that we can put through the distillery. Are we looking at it to go back to it? Yes, we are. For those that haven't heard of our flood rum, and I can touch on that further details, but back in 2017, we had one of our floods that went through the distillery, shut us down for 5 months. and off the back of that, we had fermentation that was 2 ferments that were down for just touch over 4 months, 127 days and 130 days. So this long fermentation time, and the rum that came out of that, we produced 12 barrels, and we just released the first batch of it back in March. Instant sellouts, fantastic. Actually, we've won a couple of medals in the last few months for it in international shows, the International Spirits Competition, San Fran Spirits medals, and IWC gold as well. So,
it's done okay. There seems to be a lot left. There seems to be a lot of love for it. Like Emily saying, "Flood rum for the win." I know everyone's very excited. Suddenly, as soon as you just like flood rum, it becomes very exciting suddenly. Do you know what I mean? Like well, it's probably a little bit too soon, but our friends at Trailer, who've had the worst fucking week ever with the rains here in London, the floods there, yeah, you know, they've been dealing with flood rum in the worst possible way, but you guys have been dealing with flood rum in a very amazing way and having some great success off the back of it. Ollie's asking, how much have you got left? Have you got any left?
Not enough.
Can we get any? Can you send any over here? I think we might have a few buyers here. So,
and I've seen obviously on the socials during the week what's happened there with Sly and the guys, the team at Trailer, and as I've opened up the discussions, is it something that we could potentially put up for auction for the team? There is a bottle or a couple of bottles of our flood rum of what we do have available, but that's conversation for another time. So again, but
it's very on the nose, but I feel like it would sell. So I mean, and we'll put up the link as well, just on a side note to all of this. We've all been pitching together over here, obviously, and I know people around the world have been dipping in to help support Trailer and support their GoFundMe and get their bar back on track. It's, you know, it is my favorite bar in the world. It's the bar I first ever did shifts at. So we'll put up the link for the GoFundMe as well. So if anyone hasn't seen it yet, please support them, because yeah, it's after the worst year and a half ever in the bar industry, to then have that happen is just ridiculous and insane. And a lot of the guys, they're doing here we go, we've got the link there now. The guys are doing a pop-up tonight, which I know Keegan was at as well. Yeah, we like for me it's the home of rum here in London, so it's yeah, it's we need to support them and get them back open.
Yeah, and with like out of the adversity of this last flood that we had, we had 3 meters of water plus through the distillery, and so having this long fermentation time, and off the back of that, then with what we've released and the accolades that have come our way in the last few months has really sparked our interest to again look back to that longer fermentation time. Now that flood rum itself that we've released was actually a Cerevisiae ferment, even though it was for that longer fermentation cycle. And we've also had the business also come back to us and go, well, okay, how can we do it again? Well, we don't want 3 meters of water through the distillery, but we are looking at again to explore the longer fermentation times. And go back to that, because we, like I said, back from the mid-2000 era, that we do have when we were doing the Pombe yeast and propagation tanks and system to focus on that. We still have all that kit here, and so it's not out of the it's not impossible for us to do it.
Well, I think a lot of people would be happy about it for sure. We had a great question earlier from Maggie Campbell, and she was asking, what do you wish that us people overseas understood about Australian rum when it comes to the misconceptions of Australian rum? Because I think there is, and we touched on it earlier, there is a misconception around Australian rum even within Australia itself, you know, around the polar bear and you know, the national spirit, and there is a perception of what Australian is, this rough, ready kind of, you know, and one of the things that's interesting to me about when I was in Australia, it's the only place in the world where I'd ever do tastings, and if people weren't used to rum, or they were like, you know, thinking about coming along or not sure, and quite often they say, oh, I don't want to have too many rums, like I don't want to start fighting people. And I'd be like, what the hell are you talking about? And it's the only country in the world where Australian rum has this like fighting spirit kind of tag on, whereas everywhere else in the world we think of it as this very laid back, very chilled, like drink it on the beach and your pina coladas, and you know, you're liming, you're hanging out, you're drinking rum. It's a very laid back spirit, and Australia has this very different perception, even within the country. So you're at the forefront of changing that. I feel you've been banging the Australian drum and like getting people excited about Australian rum again. Where do you feel it's at? What do you feel like needs to change, and what do you wish that people understood more about it?
It's a great question, because I see it from two angles. Domestically, yes, we deal with one significant brand all day, every day. And I'm not just talking Beenleigh. It is the rum industry as a whole, and you know this, Mitch. But like we just look across the rest of what's happening in the rum industry here, across multiple brands. Some of them have been around coming on 20 years. There is a big, we are the second largest producer. There's a big gap in volume right down to the new guys, but not just looking at volume, you know, to look at the quality of the liquid that is coming out from, you know, whether it's husk. We've got, you know, Australia's biggest and best agricole, you know, distillery, you know, single estate, an hour away from us here, putting out absolutely great liquid. On the other side of Australia, we've got Hoochery in the middle of nowhere, in the Kimberleys, middle of Western Australia. Basically, yeah, it's what anybody else would consider the outback. Been awarded Australia's champion rum 6 or 7 years out of the last 10.
So the Hoochery, for people who are outside of Australia who might not know, so Hoochery is more commonly known as Ord River rum. So the Ord River brand that comes out of there, originally by Spike, who's sadly passed away now, but yeah, Ord River is their brand, and obviously the Husk guys for the Australian agricole, which is a whole other we could dive into that conversation as well.
Yeah, so there is a plethora of a new I guess a new wave of what is Australian rum coming through. So, and that's really opening Aussie's eyes up, because as I said, you know, until probably the last 5 years, you know, they've only ever really known one, maybe two brands. And so then there's that whole domestic misconception, oh, I don't drink rum. And there's connotations and reasons around that, whether that's personal experience themselves, whether it's a personal experience that they've had to, you know, involved with other individuals, or they just don't know any different. And that's been a big thing here until the last 5 to 10 years, with technology and accessibility to the market, or the fact that because Australia is so isolated to the rest of the world, we, you know, if we look probably the current generation, previous generation, doing a lot of, you know, increasing a lot more international travel, and so exposure to a lot more, you know, culturally, a lot of different rum producing locations, countries, and a lot of that rum culture that goes along with it. You know, anywhere in the Caribbean, it's part and parcel of every country in some way or another. So that's from the domestic angle here, but internationally, what is that misconception on Australian rum? I guess it's somewhat similar, is that but coming at from looking at it from a different angle, is that for people internationally to realise that that's where Australians are coming from, is they would typically only know one or two brands, unless they are educated in the spirits sector or specifically the rum sector. And that's the thing, is, for those that have heard or have tasted, one or two of these major brands that are out there, that's that liquid. It's not a representation of Australian rum. Bundaberg is, for example, is physically 10 times size bigger than the Beenleigh facility, and we're not focused on volume. We're focused on quality, and it's that quality that we're known for. We've always been known for. Yes, we've had ups and downs and changes in the last 30 to 40 years, but more recently, it is that quality that we're focused on, and we're really seeing that that the results come out of, particularly out of the European focus for us, but now getting across into North America, both US and Canada. And I guess now, in the same time, the global market essentially has got a lot smaller due to technology, online, social media, websites. It's great feedback for our guys, our team here at the distillery. They can jump on, say, social media, and they can see an independent bottling release of Beenleigh liquid in Europe, in the US, in Canada, and see the consumer feedback instantly. And it's so gratifying for our guys here to see a liquid they produced 15, 13 years ago, to see that results now and that feedback. And then we see that the results that we're starting to see come through out of our spirits medals and awards, and some of the, I guess, some of the kudos that we're seeing out of the pillars in the industry. I won't name individuals, but that feedback that we're getting time and time again, we use the phrase, we really are being noticed as a diamond in the rough for the global rum distilleries.
And you can see it with the kind of collaborations and the kind of bottlings you have coming out now around the world, using your juice. It's exciting. It's and I think for many people, Beenleigh is the face now of Australian rum, which is, I mean, that's awesome. especially when you're not just the only distillery there, and you've got other distilleries which are bigger, and to be the global face of Australian rum now, I think is incredible. So kudos to you. And if anyone has any Beenleigh at home, pour it out and let Steve know what you think, because it's I'm gutted because all of mine is stuck in Amsterdam at the moment, and I'm waiting for the borders to open up again, because I have all of the inner circles waiting for me in Amsterdam, and I just need to get out over there so I can have it. So on that then, following that thread, have you got any exciting Beenleigh releases that we should be looking out for? Anything fun which might not be on the shelves yet that we should keep our eyes peeled for? I feel like Keegan probably knows about it all already, but for everyone else who wants to buy some Beenleigh, what should we be looking out for coming out soon?
Yeah, so we do have European distribution with Valier, with Luca and Danny and the team. So that sorry?
That helps.
Yes, that's fantastic support from the team there. So that's the inner circle, and we've got a couple of the Beenleigh bottlings available as well. To be honest, the European market is our focus. We are working on some potential US and Canadian distribution, but that's a long way away at the moment for us. The real focus for us is to increase our exposure and market domestically, first and foremost. that is the priority. But from the international piece, as I said and touched on earlier, the team at EAC and Main Rumco, again, fantastic advocates and supporters of the Beenleigh liquid. And so what we are very fortunate to experience and see this wave of what's happening through the independent bottling scene and industry. We've got, I think it's now 20 plus independent bottling brands and labels, all with Beenleigh releases. Anywhere from the oldest liquid we have through the independent bottlers is 2007, and right up to 2015, 2016 is the youngest liquid that we've got out through those bottlers. Hopefully, Mitch, you would have seen in the last week, we've seen a Duchess release.
Yes, I saw that.
People
are very excited about that platypus. Yeah. So I think Drew Garrison, who I believe is on the Zoom room somewhere with us, he put up a picture saying, "Oh, the perfect label doesn't exist," and then the picture of the platypus. He's like, "And now it does."
It's just a beautiful label. And Steve reached out to me and was just like, "Yeah, they're in the river behind the distillery." And I was like, "Well, that just makes it even cooler." But I think that would help sell a lot more rum bottles in the US if we had a platypus on them. So I think I'm gonna look into it for my own brand now.
Excellent.
Yes, doesn't want a platypus in the bottom.
Yeah, just touching on that for the international folks, the platypus is considerably rare in Australia, and the Albert River here up in the headland waters, they have been found. They can be found. And so it's great to see that label come out with a bit of local fauna for us here that not very many people realise unless you're a local. So it's good to see that. From the other international releases, a few other things other independent bottlers about to launch with the Beenleigh liquid, but I won't go into too many details there. I've got to keep some secrets. We know that
you don't. You can just tell us everything, Steve. That's what we're here for. We're here for the inside scoop.
So Luke needs to tell me when we're releasing the Valier co-bottlings, but I'll let him and Danny and the team and leave that to them. But there's a 2006 and 2015 about to launch there.
Oh,
very exciting.
Nice.
Yep.
Very cool. So guys, start saving. Don't spend all your money. Like, we've got some Beenleigh rum to buy when it gets over here. So I wanna change tact slightly now. I wanna play a little video for everyone, and we're gonna talk a little bit about Navy rum in our next little section. So top up your glasses if you haven't. My rum glass is dry, so please refill your glasses and join us for the next section, because now we're gonna talk about the history of Australian rum in places you may not have expected to find it originally.
54,000 gallons of rum earlier on, but that's not all. At the William Yard, they even make their own rum casks. This highly skilled work is still done by hand. With loving care, the coopers repair and remake empty casks returned by the Navy. When they're finished and polished, on goes a brass plate with a traditional "The Queen, God Bless Her" engraved on it. As for the hooch itself, it's blended at Rangerton. Navy issue rum, or Nelson's blood, is blended to a recipe almost as old as the Navy itself. Mr. Charlton explained it all to me.
When we get it to about 40 over proof, our job is to put it into the vat and bring it down to 4.5 under proof, the strength we issue to the fleet.
How does that compare with the rum I would buy in a shop?
Well, the rum we buy in the shop, we've got 33 1/3 under proof. Well, when we get the rum, we have at the moment 4 varieties: Demerara, Trinidad, Barbados, and Australian. The Navy have their own particular blends, which is 60% Demerara, 30% Trinidad, and 10% either Barbados or 5% of Barbados or Australian. We put quantity into the vat. We know by experience now it's about 1,200 gallons to make our mix of 1,900 gallons when we add the water. We put it into the end of the vat, then we turn on the agitator, you can see behind me, give it a good turnover for 3 or 4 hours. Then we take the strength of the mixture at the top of the vat and the bottom of the vat. When those strengths agree, we know then the strength of our own mixture. We then add the appropriate amount of water required, which we get from a formula that we want so many gallons of water to bring that rum down to the strength of 4.5 degrees under. We put the water in, put the agitator on again, give it another good turn up for 3 or 4 hours. Then we once again, we take a series of strength tests from top of the mixture and bottom of the mixture. And when we find that they're both 4.5, we can't always get 4.5 exactly, but 4.3, 4.6, then we know the mixture is ready for issue to the fleet.
And then you cask it.
And then we cask it, as you can see, under the cask under the taps. The one we either put in the cured against for big ships, which is 18-gallon cask, smaller ships, 10-gallon cask, or for submarines or on small boats, we put it into 1-gallon jars.
And finally,
Now, first of all, shout out to Matt Petrick, who first sent me that video. And I remember watching it for the first time, and it blew my mind because I was like, Australian rum in the Navy blend? That's not what the marketing people told me. Like that isn't the history I've been told. And I was like, it put me on this journey of looking at Navy rum and going, well, where were they getting the rum from? Where else was it coming from? You know, so Australian rum in the Navy blend, and he talks about it there either being, you know, and obviously the blend changing. Sometimes they put it in, sometimes they might put more Barbados rum in, but Australian rum was, and he said at that time, was something that they had access to. And this is one of the crazy things for me about the Navy rum blend was it was never one thing. Every year was changing and doing different things, and they'd have different distilleries coming into it. But certainly by the end, and when that video would have been released, you know, towards the end of the Navy blend, we know there was Australia rum in the Navy rum blend, which is kind of cool. Like that's an amazing thing to know about what they were drinking. Come Black Tot Day, they would have had some Australian rum in there. So Steve, I know you've done extensive research into obviously the history of Australian rum and APAC, and if you're lucky enough to know Steve well, like you'll just get messages like throughout the night. I'll often wake up like with messages at 3-4 a.m. in the morning and be like, oh yeah, okay, cool, just discovered this like newspaper clipping from here, and like Steve's a history geek if you haven't noticed already, and has really done some digging into it. So let's talk about Australian rum. Where does this come into the blend? How did this all begin?
Thanks, Mitch and Matt, for the comment there. Yes, so we're looking at bringing Australian rum into the Royal Navy. It does actually date back, you know, it's more of a pivotal period around the early 1900s. So in 1907, we see Beenleigh, we see Bundaberg, we see CSR Pyrmont, the 3 primary rum distilleries in Australia, supplying rum into the victualling yards, in the Sydney Harbour, and that was being supplied out to the Royal Navy, or Imperial Navy as it was known at the time. The Royal Australian Navy wasn't incorporated then, it was still under English control, and the reason why I say it was a pivotal time is a couple of reasons, slightly prior to World War I, and also 1906, 1907 was also when the 2-year age statement rule came into play. And so with that, yes, in Sydney Harbour, the Royal Navy set up victualling yard. They had barrels. Obviously, there was a 20,000 gallon rum purchase order, which came from across the 3 distilleries, brought in by barrels, and I've got photos out of the Navy archives of those barrels. That were then being vatted into 2 10,000 gallon vats, And so this is just mirroring that Royal Navy rum vatting blending process out of the victualling yards in Deptford and the like in the UK. But the barrels then of the blended rum going out to the boats. I'm only just covering this a couple of days ago that is clearly noted that the barrels that they were using at the time were made from English oak, which I found quite interesting. But I do know that that's in the days before the bourbon barrel boom post-prohibition. So with that Navy rum going back out, I guess out to the fleet, which at the time was known as the Eastern Fleet. And the Eastern Fleet for the Royal Navy was basically anything east of Gibraltar. So we're talking, Indian Ocean, India, Australia, Pacific Ocean, anything in between. And then through World War One was again a pivotal time for the Australian Navy, because it was 1913 that victualling yard in Sydney actually ceased those rum vats, and they were sold off, and that victualling yard was shut down. And the reason why was that's when the Royal Australian Navy began, but it was right on the cusp of World War One. The Australian Navy and the vessels were then brought under command of the Royal Navy, but the Australian Navy never had a daily rum top.
Why was that? Was it just like well,
yep.
we don't want to give any Aussies some rum, like like why did you never get the top?
A couple of reasons. First, and the major reason, political at the time, that you've got the big, strong influence of the Navy Temperance Society. So in that handover from 1911 to 1913, from the Royal Navy to the Royal Australian Navy, and when it was the same period that victualling yard here and that rum supply to the Royal Navy at the time transferred over. The admiral that was in charge here was staunch temperance movement supporter, and so you've got that influence in World War One, and we've got all our troops going into battle into Europe, and not just the Navy. We have seen Australian rum also through. We've got Europe conflict, we've got Africa conflict, the Western Front, where the Australian troops were. It was also Australian rum with the army, not just the Navy. But what are the other reason that we start to see coming out the back end of World War One was that there was international respect for the Australian troops, courage, valor. Basically, we were wild enough as it was. We didn't need a daily rum top to get us ready to go into battle. So, and I've seen that quoted in some of the archives and newspaper clippings that have come across as well. That basically the Aussie Navy and soldiers were tough enough, wild enough. They didn't need rum to make them any worse. But then come the end of World War One, there was a major review of the Royal Australian Navy as it was at the time. This is 1919, 1920. And again, it came that moving forward that there was basically it was unnecessary. There was no reason for the daily tot to be implemented. And the biggest influence for that was really the temperance movement and what was happening with the temperance movement in the Royal Navy at the time.
So this is something which I think we, obviously looking back on history, because prohibition or temperance never took hold to that level in the UK, we kind of don't always look at that era as like, oh, well, we carried on until 1970s, so everything was fine until then, but it actually wasn't. There was a lot of discussions, and there was a lot of points where we almost lost the tot. Black Tot Day almost happened decades before when it actually did in 1970, even with the Royal Navy. And it ties in very closely and interestingly with what was happening in the Australian Navy at the time. So you had in 1911, I believe it was, you had Winston Churchill, pre-Prime Minister days, was the best job title ever, Sea Lord of the Royal Navy. And Winston Churchill as Sea Lord was put under pressure to get rid of the tot, or to curb it, or to do something. And they had loads of discussions about it and worked out lots of different things about, you know, do we get rid of a tot altogether? Do we lessen the rum ration? Do we, what do we do? And the one thing he did was he changed it from, so pre-1911, everything in the Royal Navy was, you automatically got the grog ration every day, and everyone got a G next to their name. And if you didn't want the grog ration, and if you wanted the payment instead, you would say, no, I'm temperate, and you'd get a T put next to your name. And you can kind of imagine it if you've ever been to a bar, and maybe it's less bad now, but certainly a few years ago, you went to a bar and you're like, oh, guys, I'm just drinking soda water tonight. And everyone's like, what do you mean? Like, of course, have a drink, you know, and that kind of peer pressure that would naturally happen. Imagine doing that on a ship and like, guys, I'm not having the grog, like I'll be temperate, you know. And there was a pressure put on people, but also the rum was worth something. The rum was currency. You could exchange that rum for extra food or for someone to cover your shift or whatever it was. And the one thing Winston Churchill changed in 1911 was he made instead of the grog being the standard issue and you have to opt out to get temperate, he flipped it. So everyone was then temperate from that point forward, and you have to opt into the grog. You had to request the rum. And it's a small shift, but you know, they reckon they cut it down a little bit, and it was enough for them to get away with it in Parliament and do all these kind of things. But it's just a little psychology shift of like, well, okay, you know, maybe a few people are not taking the rum now that they were, and it placated the temperance people and allowed the rum ration to carry on for another 6 decades afterwards. But not in the Australian Navy. And there is this, we were sort of looking into the history of the Australian rum ration and the fact that they were never officially allowed it as part of the Australian Navy. But there was a loophole where if an Australian served on a British ship, they could still get their rum ration every day. And then in 1921, after World War I, as you said, they stopped that as well. But I cannot imagine a world in which an Australian would be on a British ship and not find a way to get the rum. Like, I feel they would have still found a way somehow.
Yeah, it's as I say, it's the influential time that, you know, before and after World War One, and particularly with the Beenleigh brand as well. When you actually look through, away from the Navy tot itself, and you look through, Beenleigh rum branding in and around that era, we actually see the influence coming out of. I've got references from a Beenleigh advertising campaigns in that era of Anzacs and Gallipoli, Navy, also cold and flu. Like we start to get into the Spanish epidemic, influenza, which obviously we've had experiences in the last 12, 18 months as well. So
this was a picture you put up the other day with a little nod right at the bottom, obviously on the bottle, and it was like a badge of honor if it was supplied to the Navy. I think for me, when I started as a bartender, the idea of Navy rum was not necessarily a good connotation. It wasn't the best possible rum, but back in the day, it was like if you were supplied to the Navy, that was a big deal, right? It was like a badge of honor that if it was good enough for them, it was good enough for everyone.
Yes, and this particular bottle or label is 1940s to 1960s era, and so this is then shifting forward into that World War II type era. But then and I'll and that's in that era again, 1939, 1940, 1941, 1942. We saw, from Australian rum perspective, again, we saw Beenleigh, Bundaberg, and in CSR, Piermont supply or contract rum to the Royal Navy, even though they didn't have a physical presence here in Sydney, for example. Most of the Royal Navy fleet was actually stationed over in Hong Kong, then also in Singapore up until 1941, I believe. And so the rum that was contracted here to the Royal Navy didn't stay in Australia. It went onto the Royal Navy ships. It was transferred out to the victualling yards in both Singapore and Hong Kong, and then goes out to the fleet from there.
So I guess this brings us to a stage of the night where some of you may have already worked this out, where we thought it would be a really cool idea to bring Australian rum back into the blend. And specifically with Beenleigh, because obviously we love Steve and we love the rum that he makes there. We thought it would be a cool idea. So obviously I can't see everyone here, but I'm just wondering if everyone here in the Zoom room and who's watching with us online, would you like to see the new back label to our new rum coming out? If anyone's interested, we can share it now. No one's seen it before, no one's seen the blend, but you know, maybe if that's of interest, we can throw that up in a second.
I'm enjoying it right now. Breakfast rum.
Well, Steve, I'm fairly sure you got your sample before me, which I'm slightly upset about, but that's okay. That's fair. So okay, Drew Garrison in California is excited. Wei Shang's excited. Keegan's excited. I didn't think Keegan would be excited. I didn't think he'd want to know about new rum, but amazingly, yes. Jim Wrigley in the Cayman Islands, yes. Okay, Emily in Australia. Okay, cool. So let's give you a little hint. No one's seen this yet. This is outside of our little team here in London. This is the first time that anyone's going to see it. So let's see if we can make this work, and we'll put this up. And if you remember our 50th anniversary, you know, it was a very geeky breakdown of all of the casks and all of the things that we put into that blend. And this is the next level. This is our follow-up. This is our Master Blenders Reserve. So here are all the rums that are going into this year's blend. And you will notice there is some Australian rum from Beenleigh going back in, 10 years tropically aged, 4 years continentally aged, makes up 6.7% of the blend. And we've obviously got some more Hampton going in there. We've got some Foursquare. We've got some Trinidad Distillers rum in there. We've got some Demerara Distillers going in there. We've got a few more flagons because, you know, why not? Let's just put a few more flagons of Old Navy rum in. And what kind of the pivotal point of this, and I guess what's important for everyone to know, is that we've used the Black Tot 50th anniversary as our base rum. And on top of that, we've layered all these new flavors and all these new casks, and obviously reintroduced Australian rum black into the blend. This year, we'll make an extra third of the rum, which we'll put aside, and that will be the base of next year's blend. And then we'll add new casks and new rums to that as well. But I'm very, very excited, obviously, to get Beenleigh back into the blend because it's delicious. And for me, it's a historical aspect of Navy rum, which never gets talked about, and certainly breaking down a blend this way and talking about how these flavors come together. Obviously, it's not the standard fare in the rum world, and I hope everyone seeing this is as excited as I am to be able to share this and show it to you now. So Steve, obviously when we contacted you and we were like, hey, can we get some Beenleigh in there? I can't remember if I contacted you first or you contacted us first, because I feel like we talk so much back and forth that it could have been either way. But what was your feeling about putting Beenleigh back into the blend?
Just absolutely fantastic, and to see what the Black Tot releases, just amazing to see. And this is a little secret I've been hanging on to for far too long now, waiting to see it get revealed. And
we love secrets.
Yeah, right. Get it out to lips, get everybody to enjoy it, and to see really the Finest Caribbean, and then the 50th release last year, and really a lot of that feedback, particularly on the 50th blend. Just really looking forward to what everybody thinks of the Masters release for 2021. It
is sensational. Ollie gave me a taste of it the other day. So Oliver Chilton, who's our head blender, who I think might be watching in the background somewhere, and we might even put him in if he's not in his pajamas yet. But Ollie gave me a taste of this new blend the other day, and I was absolutely blown away. It's like, I can't think of a time where I've ever had a Navy strength rum and gone, oh, this is smashable, or this smashable is probably not the right marketing term, but it's almost like a session rum. Like, it's so fruity, it's so easy drinking, and it just disappeared. It was absolutely amazing. I was drinking it with Chanel, one of my colleagues at the office, and we were just like, oh my God, what? And it's so different to the 50th anniversary as well, which is interesting. If you get to try the two side by side, because in Australia, I think the 50th is only pretty much just landed, I think. So weirdly, you'll be getting the 50th and the 51st, or the Master Blenders Reserve, as we're calling it, very close together. But yes, smashable is the technical term. Yes, thank you.
I think it's the term on the poster, Mitch, just to be clear.
This is why I'm not in charge of the tasting notes on the bottles. We get other people to write that part, and then I just come and drink it with you. Seeing as we've got Ollie in the background, can we throw Ollie? Would you like to join us on screen and have a little chat about this blend? Because
sure, I've drunk loads of rum, so
quite a process. So, ladies and gentlemen, this is Oliver Chilton, our head blender at Elixir Distillers, who are the makers of Port Escape, whiskey, Elements of Islay, Single Malts of Scotland, and Black Tot Rum. And Ollie's put together this blend very lovingly. We've had probably more rum chats than you'd ever have expected to have.
So I was thinking, when you asked Steve who approached who, right? I actually remember the order of this. So we bought some Beenleigh, completely unbeknown to anybody, because I was in Liverpool, and as you said, the guys at Main Rum, so Ian is obviously one of your biggest supporters, and it was the first thing to show, like, you've got to try this. So we just bought like 4 barrels of Beenleigh for no apparently good reason. We had no plan, nothing. We just kept them. We'll just sit on those. And then I think Mitch phoned me and said, can we put Australian rum in the blend? And I think that was because Steve had been hassling you. And I sat there going, in my normal, yeah, why not? And then we Australian rum, the Navy, and it said 100 years. Well, that's a good excuse. So then I went to Skinner. He goes, yeah, but I don't want to use any of those rums because I like those. Go find some more. So I did. And we bought even more. So we now own loads of Beenleigh rum. We own tons, basically, because my boss likes it. So we own it just to drink. And it was actually the inspiration largely for the flavour profile of the rum. Although it doesn't, I wouldn't say this tastes anything like Beenleigh, but it was, you were talking about the style, Steve, about it being fruitier and bigger. I mean, I find Beenleigh, that 07 stock, to be oily and dense and heavy and fruit driven. And Skinner and I were chatting about MBR, like Master Blenders Reserve, what we do the next year. And the reason we have next year is because of a mistake. normal distillers, you know, we accidentally made a third too much rum. What do? Leave it.
We should tell this story, Ollie, because I know some people will have heard it, but everyone loves it, and every time I do a training now, the only thing everyone asks to hear is the Hampden story.
So we may have accidentally put an extra cask of Hampden into the 50th anniversary, which resulted in a disaster. Which then meant I had to go back.
Hampden's a very subtle rum. Hampden,
yes, absolutely. And this isn't even like big history Hampden. This is kind of normal, friendly, but it's still already messed with everything. So we ended up buying more Demerara, more Foursquare, you name it, and put it together. Or I put it together on a bench sample, and I thought this tastes better than the original. We'll make it, but we only had enough bottles and labels and boxes for 5,000 bottles. So we made 5,000 bottles, and then we had by chance about a third more rum. And genuinely, this is just chance. I just went, third more rum, sounds like the Navy, we'll keep it. And then Skim said, what are you going to do? I said, I don't know, make one next year. And he goes, that sounds like a very good idea. If only we had a marketing team who could think up this stuff.
Well, it was, I mean, I just remember being so excited when you called me that day, Ollie, because obviously one of the first questions I asked when I started working with Ollie was, could we build our own 32 blending vat system and like recreate an open wooden vat fermentation perpetual blend, just like the Navy used to do back in the day? And Ollie just looked at me with this kind of look of like, should I fire you now, or should I just say no? You know, and he's like, well, no, that's not how the world works anymore.
I've learned that what Mitch asks tends to either come true, right, whether you want it to or not, or you agree to it and you learn out how ridiculous it was afterwards. Like, can we put all the ingredients on the back of a label? Yeah. That was a stupid idea. I mean, it's a brilliant idea, but
people seem to like it. I mean, like,
but yeah, we went for all of that, and then obviously found the Beenleigh rum, and that fruit was kind of one of the inspirations to make a more fruit driven, completely different to 50th. Make it more fruit driven, make it more ester heavy, but still elegant, still beautiful. I hope everyone likes it. Maybe more summery. One of the rums from Trinidad basically tasted of peaches. It was like just pure peach. So we wanted that. And I wanted citrus, and I wanted to celebrate the kind of Beenleigh elements. I wanted the oiliness because I felt like it needed that fat. So I feel the Beenleigh comes through really well in this. I feel it shows really well, and it was really interesting. So we adjusted it up and down a lot. And it makes a big difference. It's an imposing rum. Like, it's really imposing. You know you're drinking it, and even in a blend it makes a big difference. So yeah, so we've got a third of this put by as well for next year, which will be fun. But one of the things about doing 50th anniversary we learned is, and I think, you know, Steve, you were talking about a lot of independent bottlers using Beenleigh. One of the problems going through the brokerage market is some names are protected, including Beenleigh, which is completely understandable, because you guys are protecting your liquid and your heritage and your brand, and if someone does something with your liquid, it's out of your control. So I've always understood that, and we had that when we did 50th. You know, Hampden, you can't write Hampden on a bottle, you just can't. And so I remember we had to go to Christelle at Hampden and Luca and say, look, we're using Hampden, we'd like to put it on the label, is that okay? And there was a big kind of, all right, for you, because we know what you'll do will be good. And I remember saying to Mitch, is that going to be all right? And he goes, well, I have to ask Steve. And Steve, very kindly, you said, you know, I need a sample, which is why you are literally the first person to try this rum outside of me. I think there was no one else in the office who tried this before you. Now, your sample is from my, it's from over there. So, whereas Mitch has only tried stuff from the vat, so yours predates his. So I'll send you a bottle so you can try it and see how it changed. Because the one thing that got me was, and with rum more than anything, that time is everything. Like the time for blending is everything. So when you're talking about the Navy vats and the continuous blending, I'm blown away by how much rum changes week by week. And we pulled a sample of this every week, every single week, and we saw how it changed. And even for the bottle, and obviously aeration when they're bottling, all of it changes the rum. I think it's quite amazing. So now I am thinking, yeah, we should just have big wooden vats that we can stick rum in and do that every year. So, there you go, Mitch. You win eventually. You always get what you want.
Well, let us know if you'd like to see big wooden vats full of rum. I feel like we've got a friendly crowd who might support this idea. But no, it is incredible. It's incredible for me seeing how the blend changes so much from year to year. It's incredible for me seeing, because when you go back to the original flagons of Navy rum, you see such a difference between year to year and the different vintages and different bottlings they did. So it's exciting that we can do something at least reminiscent of what they used to do and actually bring that kind of idea back. And this for me is what I really hope that rum blends can do, because so often you get a rum blend and it's like, oh, here's a secret recipe, or here's this thing we've put together, we'll never tell you where it's from or it's come from. And we've, as you say, we've been very fortunate that the distilleries we've worked with have allowed us to share all the information, tell you exactly what the rums are going into the blend. And for me, it's, I hope that people buy, when they find Black Tot Master Blenders Reserve, they go, cool, I want to now try all these rums individually as well. If they haven't come across Beenleigh before, hopefully it will be a nice way for them to go, cool, I'm going to now discover this rum, and vice versa. So, for me, that's what rum blends hopefully should do, is celebrate the provenance of those individual parts, where they're coming from. And, we should be highlighting the individual ingredients, because if you don't use good ingredients, you're not going to have a good blend at the end, right? So it
was also, one of the things I found really interesting tonight, Steve, is your talk on, well, I was going to ask lots of questions on seasons, because I'm quite obsessed with, like, I can not just fermentation, but distillation. That's got to destroy you. I mean, that's got to drive you absolutely up the wall with with all the condensing and controlling condensing times and everything else. But as you said, you made this style of rum, or at least it's available 05, 06, 07. And then you're doing something different now, and then you'll do something different in the future. One of the questions I was asked, I think, Mitch has alluded to this in the past, people are looking to steal your recipe. What will happen if they know what you do? And I'm always thinking, well, the distilleries have changed so much, and what you do in the future will dictate what we can do in the future. And I find that the most interesting thing, right? So, so apart from my questions about distillation, which we can probably do afterwards, because I'm not sure anyone cares that much. I do need to ask lots of questions.
Is the plan for
Beenleigh to do a range of stuff, and will that be available to people like me? I hope. Or is it to build the brands around that range of flavors that you guys can create, given the seasonal changes, the yeast varieties, the fermentation times, and the vast plethora of toys that a distiller has?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I'm not one to have a crystal ball and trying to look into a crystal ball, but it's what the brand can, and well, first and foremost, the distillery here and our team, what we can facilitate, and then how that comes through into a Beenleigh or Inner Circle brand portfolio first and foremost, and then potentially out to whether it's independent bottlers or any collaborative type efforts with other brands. So, and that's the beauty of building all these relationships and like these kind of collaborative efforts. It's fantastic. It's Rum Family, as we call it, and it's great to see. For example, this the component the Beenleigh in this blend, dates back 2007. So, if we look at 13, 14 years ahead from what we're making today, what is that going to look like? It's, as I said, I don't have a crystal ball, but it's really what spurs us along, and it's fantastic to see what kudos, I guess, the brand and the team here are getting from this liquid being produced in that era, and then how can we then project that again potentially in another 13 or 15 years forward. So,
well, anyway, I'm going to sign off by saying thank you very much for providing this rum, because it was great fun to work with, and I've still got some more to drink. So I'm going to go drink my Beenleigh. Bye, Mitch.
Turns out we just need more Beenleigh, and we have it now, so it's good. This would be so much better if we could do this all in real life, and you could fly over here, Steve, and we could just drink some rum together, because you know what, like the rum disappears. I was going to actually show the bottle of Master Blenders Reserve, but I'm going to be honest, it did disappear very quickly when we were doing samples of it. However, just for the people who are watching, we have a couple of exciting sessions coming up which you might be interested in. And if you are able to join us for the virtual rum show, which is happening at the end of this month, at the rum show we have a very special tasting pack where, right, so get this, okay. this was another of Ollie and my conversations where it just frankly just got out of hand and now has ended up in something ridiculous. So if you want to try the Master Blenders Reserve, the new rum which we're bringing out on Black Tot Day, 31st of July, but if you also want to try some of the component rums put together in a way where you can taste the individual components that make up Master Blenders Reserve, we have made that tasting pack. And it was basically Ollie creating his kind of own very ridiculous VAT system, which was very complicated to put these casks of rum together in a way. And I'm putting the link in the chat for everyone in the Zoom room now, but if you're watching online on Facebook, just head to the rum show, look for the Black Tot pack that we're doing, and you can try all of the Guyanese and Trinidadian components together, because that's kind of the traditional Navy rum that we've been sold, of like Guyana and Trinidad. So we've done that component together. We've then done Jamaica and Barbados as some of the lesser known and often, components that we don't often talk about as much, but we're definitely there at different parts during the Navy blend. We've put Beenleigh by itself because we need more Beenleigh and we need to try it by itself to taste exactly what that brings into the blend. Then we've done a component that's 50th anniversary plus Navy rum flagons together, because that just seemed like a ridiculous fun thing to do. So you can try that on its own. And then at the end of the tasting, you try the Master Blenders Reserve. So if you want to be the first one to taste it, go to the rum show, get the tasting pack, and you can do this just frankly stupid rum tasting. And then on the 31st of July, we'll actually release the bottles of Master Blenders Reserve, and you can buy it, and it will be launching in different countries around the world, basically as soon as Brexit and pandemics will allow us to get them to you. So, which might take a little while potentially, but we'll do what we can, So there seems to be a lot of love in the comments. Jim Wrigley wants a bottle brought to the Caribbean, which I will be happy to oblige anytime. Anytime you need bottles of rum, run to the Cayman Islands. I'll happily do that for you. But yes, I really can't wait to share this rum with you all. It's going to be so good. And I can't wait to have you over properly, Steve, for a rum show, because
very much
needs to be here. It's going to happen very soon, I have no doubt. Steve, thanks so much for joining us tonight. I feel like honestly, with the amount of angles we could have taken tonight, we could probably still squeeze another 2-3 hours out of this. But for everyone's sanity and sobriety, we'll keep them going. Thank you as well. Steve joined us today at 5 a.m. Australian time, because for some reason that seemed like a good idea, and so that we could get more people on this side of the world in Europe to actually hear and taste and talk about Australian rum. Thank you for the Australians who joined us, because you guys are champions. Amazingly, Australians also joined us for this chat. But no, thank you so much, Steve. You're making some beautiful, beautiful rum. And it's so exciting to see Australian rum making headway and turning up around in all parts of the world, because it deserves to be. It's delicious juice, and you've done a wonderful, wonderful thing with it. So thank you.
Thanks, Mitch. And looking forward to the rum show in a couple of weeks. It's going to be another exciting session there with Dawn and Dave Broom. So
you're doing a session called Brave New World, is that correct?
Yes. Myself focusing on the Inner Circle portfolio. Then we've got I think Dawn's focusing on Renaissance, the guys out of Taiwan that are absolutely smashing it as well. And then we've got the team out of Sampan in Vietnam as well. So yeah, something a bit different, and really looking forward to it. And I'm sure with Dave Broom, that the history nut that he is, we'll be focusing on a bit of the Walrus again, and all things Beenleigh again. So.
That's exactly as it should be. But yeah, absolutely. Please, anyone who's in the UK, if you get the chance to join us, we've got loads of rum sessions happening for the rest of this month as part of Black Tot month on the run up to Black Tot Day. So please come and join me if you're in London. We've got a session tomorrow at Lyman. We've got sessions in Canterbury, Horsham, Cardiff, Reading, London again next week at Merchant House. There's all sorts of things going on, and then we have the virtual rum show, which is the first time the Whisky Exchange ever done a rum show. So please come and join us at all of these things. Come and see Steve online again, because he has many stories to tell and many secrets, which I feel like we still need to pry out of him. But we'll get there. We'll get there. A few more sessions. Thank you for everyone who's joined us. I hope you enjoyed tonight. It's so nice to join you all and drink some rum with you all, and I hope your glasses are full. Do you have any rum there, Steve? I know it's early, but do you have any rum? Oh, well then I feel we should finish with a special toast, which one of our guests, Jim Wrigley, knows very well, because he was the one who taught it to me. But to everyone out there are tall ships, and there are small ships, and there are ships that sail the sea. But the best ships are friendships. So here's to you and me. Cheers, everyone. Cheers, Steve. Cheers, Beenleigh. We'll see you all very soon. Thank you. Good night.